I have a great story. Probably absolutely one of the first customers I ever started banking. He came to me. His request was an extremely small business loan. It really wasn't, anything larger than a car loan. But it has grown over the 8 years that I've been here. He has thoroughly succeeded and has become one of the best customers of the bank. He's loyal. He refers business to me every day, every chance that he gets, and that's cool.
Let's go ahead and call the meeting to order. And we'll turn the meeting over to Jarrett to go through the agenda.
Thank you, Mayor. Let's see. Follow the traditional habit and discuss the minutes of the meeting held last week. Comments, corrections, additions, deletions. Permutations. No comments on the minutes. Okay. Moving right along, ordinance 7368, second and final. This is changing the zoning. Piece of property just west of Sonsi. Kelly, any changes?
No, sir.
Comments? Item number 3, resolution annexation, related matter. Comments or questions on that? You'll have your ordinance coming up on October the 3rd for the first reading of the ordinance.
No, it does say it.
Yeah,
It does. Okay. I think both of those very positive items and some new opportunity and growth out there. Item number 4 is the resolution adopting your City of Amarillo Water Conservation Plan. Mr. Autry's here. He's going to move up to the table and answer any and all hard questions. This is, of course, related to your drought contingency plan, but it is separate from them. They're two different focuses, two different goals. We do this every 5 years, and you're right on time and right on schedule, so we'll turn that over to Emmett and answer any questions you may have.
I'll answer the easy questions. He indicated the hard ones. I found the hard ones too, if you got some. It is, I think, the third rendition of our conservation plan mandated by the state. Major changes between this and the 2007 rendition is basically accomplishment of things that were yet future in the 2007 plan. So I do not have a copy with me except in my head, so it's a dangerous place in there. It has to be put together according to a format recipe that the state gives us, and so pretty much the way it's outlined and sections are titled is by state requirement. We do have to deal with issues such as setting goals to try to reduce the gallons per capita per day usage from what it is, and we have had those goals in place for some time. We point out quite a few things in here that have been accomplished that were to be determined, so to speak, in the previous rendition. But if there's anything in there, anything jumps out at you, feel free to ask a question.
I think it was well presented. Talking about what we plan to do ongoing and some of the things that we have done to lower the use of water or introduce some new technologies or more modern technologies so that we can do that. And I think it's really important because in the next legislative session they are going to be dealing with water, and it's better for us to be proactive and be doing the things that we are doing than be told what we have to do.
Right. Well, I think that we see ourselves from one rendition to another becoming a little bit more proactive toward future accomplishments and things like that. And I believe that the plan that's before you today actually goes above and beyond what the state requires. It has a local flavor to it, and of course that's required to some extent. But we hope to do better even on the next one if I'm still around at that time.
Is there anything in the landscape ordinance that conflicts with the zero-scape suggestions in here? Is there anything that has to be brought into sync?
The landscape ordinance, and it's proposed in this document, needs a very comprehensive relook. Some of the items are very logical, very easy, like encouraging and incorporating xeriscape, and it's in the living, non-living land covers where that comes up. But you currently have authority vested in your planning director to accommodate those. I think some of the bigger items to look at, and this is where the net begins to necessarily get quite a bit larger, you've got, just for sake of example, you have to have 10% of the property covered with the living cover. That's where you get these small, narrow strips around the boundary that are just very difficult to irrigate efficiently. The landscape ordinance does not require or even encourage you to develop small, narrow strips. That's just how the layouts are being done. Now, is there a way to maintain a nice, green, vibrant city, but through that ordinance encourage things that are more effective and efficient, i.e. your landscape deals need to be 36 inches in width where they could be irrigated efficiently. So now you're starting to get over into development policies and planning. So that part of it begins to get a little bigger, a little busier. I'd sure like to have something moving by next spring, but in order to rope everybody into that, it's going to be pretty big.
And there could be some suggested alternatives to trees or some specific trees suggested.
There can be, and in fact, with the group that Dean and Emmett led this summer, we've published our first tree planting guide. It's very specific. It's been very well received. People mention that to me at just odd places that I wouldn't have expected. So it's out there. I think you could incorporate potentially some of that into the landscape ordinance.
Does the landscape ordinance have to do with just commercial landscape, or does it also have to do with developments, housing developments?
Part I'm familiar with is commercial.
Just commercial. What?
Commercial only.
And you have some standards for ground cover on a regular residence, though, in certain areas.
You have
Only if there may be some in some planned development, but we don't really have any requirements or standards for non-commercial.
When we were talking to builders, I think was encouraging them to incorporate xeriscape into their housing developments. And I was telling somebody that, and they said, "What the builders saying?" I said, "Well, they just look at them. I don't know that they did that."
Well, that's ultimately a decision of the homeowner. Sure. And what does the homeowner want? But I think for some of them, it's a question of what fits. And it's now very old and probably too worn Joe, but there's still a perception that xeriscape's black plastic and white rocks. And it's not. There's a lot of really nice examples of it that would probably fit in most places.
That's why I wanted the environmental advisory committee to work on xeriscape examples.
I think you're going to get more buy into xeriscape commercially than you are residential, because, for instance, new car dealerships putting that in literally damages the car's water spots. You do a subterranean drip system, it's 100 times better. And the other thing, of course, is the trees and the birds. They don't lend themselves to having attractive cars out there either. There's not just the car business, but there's a lot of other areas where they would adapt to xeriscape a lot quicker commercially. It makes more sense. And seeing those sprinklers run at 5 in the morning, just blowing all over the place every day, it's silliness.
One blowing last weekend.
Well, I think it's wise us to just keep talking about it, not just in the summertime when we're talking about water conservation, but as a process throughout the year on how we're going to address these issues.
I think we get everything in sync. The landscaping, what you suggest to other people, demonstration sites, businesses commercially, and then guide into this. That's
the best thing I could drop did for us. Let's have everybody start talking about this. always is they have a budget.
If there is a silver lining.
Awareness is the highest that I've ever seen, and it'll stay that way for a while.
Well, this hasn't exactly been a rainy season this year. We've had some rains, but they've been,
We're still below.
well below, spread out too far.
We didn't have the wind and the heat
Yeah.
Yeah.
we did last year. We
Good
haven't
work,
had a
Dennis.
lot more rain.
All at the same
Keep it
time.
up.
If I may, I'd like to mention, and I think you're probably aware of this, but the team of staff that's including Kelly Shaw that is looking at the landscape and landscape-related ordinances to come up with a recommendation for you all. And I'm on there, Floyd is on there, Scott McDonald is on it, a group from different affected departments and divisions. And also, I'd like to mention that we've had one developer who has talked to us about having a development commons area that was more towards drought-tolerant, warm season grasses, et cetera. And I think that's a good way to get the idea out there in a development like that. Not saying it's a done thing, but the idea is there, and we welcome that.
It would be fascinating to be able to do things at the same time.
I think
And
that's
can I
going to
mention
finally be what
75 ways to lower your water bill.
All 75.
Well, it may be more. I'm almost finished with a PowerPoint program, but I opened my big mouth and told Dean I'd like to put together a PowerPoint program titled X Ways to Lower Your Water Bill. And in there is xeriscape landscaping as well as drought tolerant and so on. So far, I'm going back through and counting the recommendations that are in the PowerPoint program. About 2/3 of the way through now, and I think I'm at number 47. So it's going to address water conservation inside the house, outside the house. It's aimed at residential. And so what we would like to push, I think, is to have lawns that have maybe a drought-tolerant emphasis in them, but not replace the lawn altogether, but reduce the amount of grass that's being irrigated by having xeriscape and or drought-tolerant landscape areas. That's what I plan to do in my front yard, as a matter of fact. My wife has given me permission.
It's fascinating when you're in a place like Albuquerque or Phoenix and you drive into one of those subdivisions that's xeriscape, how it all seems to fit. Yet when you take a xeriscape property and put it in the middle of a manicured lawn property, it just does not have the same appeal.
Well, living in Albuquerque, I saw the beginning of that was the rocks and the plastic and how thick was your visqueen so it wouldn't break your weeds through, and that was it. And a few low green plants, that was about it. But it's evolved into a lot more than that. I think one of the difficulties we have hearing from our customers, from the people living here, is coordinating the message we're putting out from the zoning, code enforcement, and water department to make sure that we're really saying the same thing to everybody on what you can and can't do. And as we're in flux, I just think it might take some training and some definition to be sure. When I hear about that, it might be somebody that asked somebody they know in the wrong department. But having everybody singing off the same song sheet is not always easy.
Very, very important to ensure update that ordinance.
Yeah.
And we still hear, if y'all made us do that, we'd do it. Not dissimilar from other arguments. I think it's a continual process. Albuquerque and Santa Fe are good examples, but they've been doing that 45. Albuquerque 40-plus years. Santa Fe probably 20, 25.
El Paso forever.
And I tell you, there are places in Albuquerque where it looks terrible. If you drive into somewhere, I'll take you in there. I mean, it's terrible. Not all of them are up to snuff. And that's one of the things we want to guard against, is creating this sort of orthodox type landscaping system where somebody doesn't take care of the yard, the next person does, and you've really got a mess with that. For instance, a friend of mine did buffalo grass, and he said it took 5 years to get that to do it right. He said he had to manicure and work it for 5 years to get it in where he didn't have to do much with it. Somebody that does less, he said it's taken over by weeds. So if they don't dedicate that time period, Bill Esther is what I'm talking about on his property. So it's not a simple deal, but it sure needs some more.
People give up before they get
And then it just turns, and so you got one neighbor, as you see with grass now, which is a lot simpler. You get something more complicated like xeriscape. It needs to be defined.
Well, we'll never get 100% participation. I mean, human nature being what it is, but we can keep educating.
Sure.
The simplest way to reduce residential water use is control your sprinkler tonners. I mean, that's it.
And not everybody, I've been reminded several times, have sprinkler systems.
And
I do now.
And they are generally efficient in the use of their water.
automatically.
Yeah.
And I don't have a blade of grass.
You did not, Tony?
I had a sprinkler system, but not a timer.
Speaking of that, Dean, are we going to be able to let our customers know that we have that program where we can check their sprinkler systems and in case they have broken heads or whatever, so we can tell them?
We're working on
We'll
the bid document now
Oh, okay.
to hopefully get some of the landscape companies involved with it. And then the idea is that I think we budgeted $25,000 for that program, if I remember right. And then what we were hoping to do is on probably a high bill complaint to offer to send out this person to check their system. But we'll have a checklist of the items they're supposed to check, and they'll leave with the homeowner. We'll probably check with the homeowner, at least on a random basis, to see if they were satisfied with the service, to kind of see if it was valuable to them. And then once we run out of money, what we'd like to do is just put them on a list for next year. But I've heard the program was very good in Carrollton, but we hope to have it out to bid pretty soon now. We'll certainly should have it up and running before the spring.
just keep trying until we find the stuff that works.
You don't always have to reinvent the wheel because a lot of cities are doing things.
A lot of cities have been in very dire straits with water. The gamut of things that you can do is pretty well known.
And right now, water is going to be the number one issue, right? Is.
One largest out of your legislative session. Okay, any more questions on water conservation plan?
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we'll get Dean and Mr. Stephen Adams. Stephen is your financial advisor, specialized public finance, and we're going to talk about both numbers 5 and 6. These are the approval of your notice of intent for the issuance of the certificates of obligations that were referenced last week in the reimbursement resolution.
But don't let Stephen fool you. He's an Amarillo boy.
Are you here from the big city to help us?
Yeah, that's right. Right down the street.
Came from more than 150 miles and did a briefcase.
Thank you, Dean. Jared. These next two items on page 1 are for two resolutions that, as Jared mentioned, authorizing the publication of the notice of intent to issue two separate issues of certificates of obligation. Just a couple of notes. One, there are two required publications for the issuance of certificates of obligation by state law. We were working with Bob Transfer to try to figure out a way to do one certificate issue rather than two, but according to the way the state law is written, we had to do this in two separate issues, and that's why there's two separate resolutions. The first resolution will be in regards to the issuance of up to $6.9 million of combination tax and revenue certificate of obligation series 2012A. The issue is expected to be $6,260,000 based on some updated cost estimates that were lower than the original projections.
And that'll be for the drainage utility.
And we'll go through each one of these in a little bit more detail in the next few pages. The second resolution will be in regard to the issuance of up to $2.79 million in certificates of obligation, Series 2012B. Both of these issues will have pledges of revenue sources. They're both different. We'll go through them shortly, and also an ad valorem property tax. The credit rating will be based on the city's general obligation rating, even though we expect the revenues to repay all of these certificates, so there won't be any tax monies used to repay them. But because we put the tax pledge behind it, we will have the advantage of Amarillo's AAA Standard & Poor's bond rating and AA1 Moody's rating, so we should get very, very competitive interest rates in these sales.
So that pledge is simply to lower the cost for this.
Yes.
Okay.
And primarily because the two revenue sources, unlike water and sewer, are new sources that don't have current ratings on their own. So in the future, if these revenues become more well-known and we have some history behind them, the goal would be to drop the tax pledge in the future.
But it's basically to save the city money right now.
Yes. Save money. Absolutely. The Series 2012 certificates we expect to be about $6.26 million, and they will be used as follows, and this is wording directly from the resolution. Acquiring, improving, and constructing municipal drainage facilities, including the purchase of land, rights of way, and equipment, therefore, and professional services rendered in relation to such project and the financing thereof. We will have a pledge of net revenues of the city's drainage utility system, and that there will be within the resolution, within the ordinance, a coverage requirement of 1.25 times debt service, which acts to limit the amount of debt we can issue and, if necessary, raise the rates, and also a pledge of ad valorem property taxes, again, to lower the interest rate.
And that, the 1.25 pledge is the same pledge that we use in water and sewer.
Correct.
Let me ask a question of council. In this first one, the 2012A certificate, do we even need to speak to whether this is 6.9 million or 6,260,000? We don't even need to go there, do we?
I would agree, just as it's stated there, because you're setting the ceiling by this resolution.
Not to exceed.
Not to exceed 6.9.
Does that need to be in my motion?
No, the resolution is as worded and as stated in the agenda is up to 6.9. Again, we're always looking for cost savings, and as they've indicated, we're already looking at something under that. But the future is always unknown until we get there. We leave that upper limit in place.
In my motion, I can just simply say that the notice of intention to issue certificates of obligation series 2012A.
We approve.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
And that's the common language from your bond counsel that carries through all of the different documents. And as Marcus said, you're setting the top.
Right.
And we know we've already worked our way down to some extent.
Yeah.
It's just where we get.
Okay.
Okay, moving on to page 3. This is the actual projects to be financed, and there are 2 projects which are 20-year financing, and then some equipment which is 5-year financing. So, as a result, we've broken the issue into a $5 million and a $20 million piece that you can see at the bottom half of the page, and how we get to the $6.26 million.
You said a $5 million and a $20 million?
I'm sorry, 5-year and 20-year.
Gotcha.
Wishful thinking.
And that Farmers Avenue from Georgia to Western, that is a project I believe you awarded last week.
Right.
Martin Road hadn't been awarded.
No, this is just for design costs for $350,000.
This doesn't speak to the money we're getting from TxDOT to mitigate some of our costs. 1.7 or
1.7, and that's correct. And that's TxDOT money specifically, exclusively for the road part of the
If that part goes away, if we don't do this now, that will disappear. We will never get it back.
Okay, page 4, you can see the debt service schedules with the 20-year portion on the left and the 5-year portion in the middle. And on the right, you can see the debt service, which will be a little bit over $515,000 or $516,000 for the initial 5 years, and then it drops down to $326,000 or $27,000 for the remaining 15 years to finance those projects. And these lives are, the debt service is based on the projected life of the underlying assets, although we do expect that the 20-year financing projects will last far longer than 20 years.
Yeah, we have a policy not to issue debt for longer than the useful life of the asset. So that's why, and although I think the rolling stocks will last more than 5 years too, but the rolling stock is at 5 years and the drainage infrastructure is at 20.
Stephen, just a curiosity question. Why does the coupon rate drop after year 5 for a couple of years? Drops to 1.02 and then down to 1.19, then accelerates again.
We anticipate, well, we're going to do these on a competitive bid basis, and the bidders make their profit margin in the maturities in the early years. So the actual yields on the bonds will be lower than the 1.2 that you see in 13 through 18, but the winning bidder, we anticipate, will bid a coupon rate, and then they'll sell those bonds at a lower yield, and that'll be their profit. So we've tried to anticipate how these will be bid when the actual bids come in.
Gotcha.
We'll go through this a little later, but we're going to take bids on the morning of the day of the meeting that we sell it. So
we've also never had a better time to garner low rates.
We're about as slow as they've been. I mean, maybe could go back to the 60s or early 60s.
Obviously, that's another reason to take advantage of this now.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right. Page 5, similar information for the 2012 B certificates. We expect it to be $2.79 million, and the project to be acquiring rolling stock equipment, vehicles for the municipal garage department, and professional services related to the financing. There will be a pledge, a limited pledge of net revenues of the municipal solid waste disposal fees, and again, ad valorem taxes of the city. And again, neither one of these revenue sources have ever been rated, so that's the purpose, to save money for the ad valorem property tax pledge.
The repayment is that stream of the rentals that you see in the various departments. So some will come out of the various different enterprise funds, and will come out of the general fund, but that's also what keeps it out of having to activate that tax pledge.
Now, this has a limited pledge on the solid waste revenues, so we'll probably only pledge like $1,000 of solid waste revenues, and then once the solid waste system pays the $1,000, which will get it on the first payment, then that revenue stream will be freed up to pledge to something else if you want to.
A future issue.
A future issue.
Maybe revenue only.
What's a 60
It's a 60,000-pound truck body with a sewer sucker on top of it. Fair way to say it, Emmett?
It's a big piece of equipment.
It also accommodates sewer cleaning hose and nozzle setup.
I've heard of that.
Yeah, really, I'm like, thanks.
We can show you some footage.
For our evening meeting.
It's a good name.
Again, that's page 6. That's the equipment being purchased we're talking about.
And that entirety of that issue is a 5-year.
Right, page 7. This is a short issue because rolling stock, and we expect that the rolling stock's life will be through 2018, probably longer, but certainly no shorter than 2018. So, and again, the coupon rates here are all at 1%. The yields will be lower, but that's how we anticipate a potential bid coming in.
Jared, you'll start collecting rent on these things to offset that next purchase in 5/8.
We started last Monday.
So it'll be the only time you really have this type of issues.
And on both of them, your first payment is not until the end of the fiscal year, so you've got your full years of collections from both of the revenue sources before you tender the first payment.
And how many of these are new pieces and how many are replacement?
I think all this was replacement.
The grass rig is going to go in another one and get subbed into a pumper. It's an existing grass rig. It's not going to come out as a grass rig.
Yeah, we'll upgrade that to a pumper with some other money, but these are all on the replacement schedule. Get pushed back farther and farther.
Yeah, I don't think, other than making a pumper out of a grass rig, which is an upgrade, I don't think any of these are really.
Cup grinder, is that the big thing that eats everything?
That's the greatest one.
We're going to have two of them?
No, the one you've got is done. New vehicles in the budget. You had new equipment going into drainage utility, and of course it's in the other issue. Those are new, but we added a pickup or two for
We
building
added a fire,
safety, and we did police cars.
Fire,
Solid waste disposal.
I thought we had the supervisory vehicle. Is that last year?
Yeah, we just purchased it.
Oh, you
It was
did?
in last year's budget. Yeah, command car.
Yeah.
Okay, page 7, I think, is where we were, just to show you the debt will mature in 2018 with level debt service of about $480,000 annually. Page 8 is the timetable of events. We authorize the intent to publish today will be considered by the Commission. If it passes, the first publication will be on the 11th, and followed by second publication on the 18th. Statutorily, we cannot sell the certificates until 31 days after the first publication on October the 11th. So while that 31 days is moving forward, we will go ahead and get the ratings and put the documents together to receive a bid on the morning of November the 13th, which is a commission meeting day. And we'll probably get those at 10:30 in the morning, and we'll put together presentations for present offers to the commission to purchase the two respective sales at the meeting that afternoon. If all goes as planned, Fulbright Jaworski will send all the legal documents to the Attorney General's office for review and approval, and we will close December 13th, 2012.
This debt will also be bank qualified because this will be under a $10 million issue, and especially this rolling stock will be very attractive to banks.
How much margin do we have on these dates compared to what TxDOT's requiring for us to start spending that money? Are we okay?
We are okay if we hold to this schedule.
Okay. But we've got to watch that. I mean, this is okay.
And Mr. Rice and his group are doing the lockstep dance on this deal. We checked the first box with the award of the project.
Okay.
So our drainage project. So now it's make it happen.
Okay. Good. Good plan.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Two separate resolutions. So we'll have to call for a motion and approval on item 5, and then separately also on item 6. Questions on either of the two?
That's kind of the best of all worlds. Low interest, match money from TxDOT, get the project started, meet all the timetables and get that interest now. That's great.
Yeah.
Well, the concept of money at 1.0 or maybe something even less than you've heard is just, it's hard enough to take that opportunity to get yourself set up and moving forward. You'll never find the cost of funds.
Certainly for expenditures that are necessary. sure we want to go doing a bunch of things just because you got cheap
It goes
money.
up to 5%.
Interest rates are so low, it just makes me want to go out and borrow some money.
Go buy another car.
Please don't encourage them.
That would be your own money.
And
Oh,
that,
that's
you're
right.
speaking on a
Do what you
personal
want.
level.
Yeah, do what
That's
you
a
want.
personal.
With your own money.
Desire.
I'm not going to borrow any money ever again in my life.
Item number 7, appointments, boards, and commissions. We have on here today your Amarillo Hospital District Board of Managers. Ms. Barnes and Mr. Graham have served ably and well, and are stepping down. I think 2 names that have been suggested for those would be Mr. Mark Logsdon, Mr. Smith Ellis, both of whom are willing to accept and serve should you so choose. And Mr. Speed has just completed his first term and would recommend reappointment for Mr. Speed. He's also willing and able to do so.
I think that's great.
That's a good group.
Consent agenda. Item A, purchase of mowers and utility carts for various different groups throughout the city. Kind of exciting or kind of scary, depending on how you look at it, how much some of the mowers and so forth cost. We are very pleased to bring this to you this year and bring it to you with a 5% decrease from the cost of recent purchases. I am very pleased to see the wide number of bidders, and ultimately I think that increased your competitive advantage, and you see that through the wide number of different groups that receive the awards.
Yeah. It's cool.
Not your grandfather's, no Briggs and Stratton.
Pretty interesting on that $4,000 item and a $2,000 higher bid. It is competitive.
Yes, it is. Item B, Edgefield area or addition sewer main rehabilitation project. Another project for him and his group. This is a large project, over 12,000 linear feet of existing sewer main in the Edgefield area. That's older infrastructure. That's infrastructure that has pretty much told us it's done.
Where is that?
There is supposed to be a location map. It's
Over
over
the map that goes with
over off Washington.
Yeah.
Jared, on that last item, question about the non-specs. When you get a non-spec bid that's so much lower, do you call them and try and figure out why the specs were right, or if there's the ability for them to adjust that?
If your bid is bypassed for any particular reason, it's non-spec, it was not responsive, we notify actually in writing the bidder. Bidder A, you were the apparent low bidder for this item. However, we're not recommending it for award. We asked for 100 horsepower diesel and you bid a 75 horse gas. We give them then a period of time during which they can contest that or say, well, you guys made the mistake and here's so, and that's done in all cases.
But we don't give them the opportunity to re-bid.
No, they cannot rebid. The mistake has to be on our part. If it's on a bidder's part, and you see that occasionally. You all have pointed out on some big construction contracts, somebody will be $300,000 over. It's because they bid their lump sum and their unit prices wrong. Well, you can't correct nor fix that. So I really meant to say I'd do that for $10,000, but what it came out as was 10,000 times 100. And
You could
ask you to bid.
withdraw if there was a specific problem and have everybody rebid.
And then everybody except that one person gets mad at you.
Yeah, true.
Because their bid has already been approved.
There's two parts of that question.
Been there.
We can look at bids, and it doesn't happen often, but you can look at bids and say, well, obviously we put something in here that's not working, and our bids are too high, we reject all bids. And then we stop that right there, we back up, regroup, and start all over. Still doesn't make most of the bidders happy. You do have occasion where a low bidder has missed something and has set an artificially low bid. They've done it unintentionally, but they've looked up and said, I can't do it for that.
They're out.
They can withdraw that bid. And then depending upon the circumstances, your standing policies might prevent them from rebidding within 3 months, 6 months, 1 year.
Yeah, I heard of one where it was 5 years.
Yeah, and there's usually a more egregious
Yeah, there was.
history to some of those.
Yeah.
And if you consider how many we do a year, it's still very rare on either side.
But you're trying to get an understanding with these bidders, so we aren't just arbitrary with them. They understand why it happened. Okay.
And again,
Most of
they
them
have a
are
chance to
favorable
protest.
because they've been on the other side of things.
Yeah, right. Okay, thank
And
you.
they can call it, once they read the project, they can call and ask questions, can't they, before they submit it?
Absolutely. Complicated or complex project or first-time project will have mandatory pre-bid meetings. And you may have an engineer or project manager in the room. And you do Q&A, and you actually produce in writing a document for all bidders that says, okay, somebody asked about sheet 112, and here was the question, and here's the answer. And they have to turn that back in as part of their bid. It says, okay, y'all clarified this, and I know you did.
In relation to this item, when we say that they've passed their usable lifespan, I think as we go forward with some of these projects, that it might be an educational tool to say how old those systems are and if they're being replaced, because we know that we have a lot of aging infrastructure, and I think we owe it to public to say, you know, this is a 50-year-old or 65 or whatever.
Probably in the 30s or 40s when Edgefield was put in.
Okay, so I think that's a piece of information that, you know, should be available just so that we can be able to answer questions. You know, we're not just going out there willy-nilly and putting in new sewer systems and stuff. We're doing it because they're aged and they're crumbling.
We can easily find exactly when that subdivision was put in, but it goes back at least 60 or 70 years, I'd say.
And that's too long
that'd be
for
important.
material they used.
People are getting sick of hearing about the wooden pike and Kansas Center.
It's a great story.
It is a great story.
And another thing on that, the materials that we use these days are superior to what was used when the system was put in.
Like that wooden pipe.
Sir?
Like the wooden pipe in San Jacinto.
I'm not going to talk about vectors, but it's usually high-density polyethylene, and it's joined together thermally, so there literally are no open joints like you have in some of the older pipe. It therefore doesn't leak water into the sewer, which is a real problem for us because we have to treat that volume. During rainy seasons, if you have a sewer system that's not tight, you'll get a lot of excess water out of the plant, and that can be a problem. So the newer materials are much better than what was original.
You saw how some of that old stuff is jointed. You would be shocked that it's worked as long as it has. How they secured the joints.
See the joint, yeah.
Exactly.
Thank
The
you.
water pipes, not here, but in other places for land. Okay, item C, acceptance of your emergency shelter grant or ESGs. Would like to pass out, this is part of your backup. This is a revised backup. There's no change in the dollar amounts, the bottom lines, all of that. All that's as is. After we published the agenda, the state came back in, worked with James and Vicki, and they've reallocated a little bit into the different categories. If that makes sense. But there's no net change.
Okay. So it changed them.
No net change. Bottom line's good. Good example of the golden rule.
We had to shift some money from operating costs into what the state's calling homelessness prevention and rapid rehousing, so we can help people who are facing eviction or to get them back into a house.
Keep them from becoming homeless.
Right.
Extension's better than sure.
So were these people who in 2011, 2012 got operating costs, would they get that every year? And so this is a real,
We haven't received this money for a year and a half, so they're thrilled to get what they can get, and they've worked out this plan themselves.
Since they're cutting back so much money, they're causing this to happen. So it's kind of nice for them to put some emphasis on it.
Sure. The big changes are the operating expenses at Another Chance House and Family Support Services. I guess Martha's home as well.
Right.
Questions on the ESG?
Now, this handout does not have the 79 cents on it, which was lined up
Yes.
with what's in.
Did we drop 79 cents, Speaker?
Did you add all that stuff?
Yes. Very quickly, but I
All the
noticed
zeros?
I noticed the 79 cents not being there.
You're right, there's a 79 cents missing, and I have no idea where it goes, but we'll put it in an
Probably in
appropriate place.
Dean's, that big water fund that he has.
Yeah, we'll cover the 79 cents.
See, Commissioner.
There you
Right away, that's what that private public.
Hey, somebody just got money from the lawyer.
Well, that's a turnaround. I didn't know that was even a two-way street.
We'll solve that problem right now.
Send it back to the state, it'll screw them up.
We didn't use
Okay,
this.
before we lock up the grant funds, move to item D if you could, please. Item D is the request for the approval of an amendment to the professional services or the engineering contract on the group that is doing now the painting of the Osage elevated water storage tank. This project began actually a year ago. The other tank involved ended up having major structural repairs that this body approved through change orders. We ultimately stopped this project as we headed into the spring into high water demand. We need to get it going and get it finished. And this is what it's going to cost us to do so. It is in addition to the approved contract. It's still within the project budget, though. Questions on item D? We'll wrap up today in the commission meeting with your Every Drop Counts WaterWise update for the end of September.
That higher number on that deal, 59, would not be above what the next closest bidder was.
Since this is engineering,
So
those
it's
are
not-
not bids, they're professional services. Okay, because I'm going to get Kelly to step up here just real quickly. Appreciate y'all's attention and discussion the last 2 weeks as we talked about the annexation policy, preparing the necessary items to bring forward to you for consideration. Next week, thought we would today stand to answer any questions or thoughts that you may have. And in addition, Kelly, Marcus, and others have done just a real quick, I don't know that it's fully a summary, but just a quick rundown of different tools related to infill and redevelopment. Again, it's a bit of a separate topic from an annexation policy, but of course it's part and parcel of your comprehensive plan. Something important to this body, and I'm sure we're glad to pick this up and work on it as kind of the next step. But these are things you've seen done, or we've seen done in different areas throughout the state.
There was a question last week, and maybe, provide some information on what can be done for incentives for infill and or redevelopment. And so on the left side, I basically just put some of the more common things that are being used throughout the state. We ourselves basically have used most of these. There are a few that we haven't, but are aware of them. But on the right side is there are different programs that you can use, but it's just thought it was worth mentioning that in order to implement those types of programs, there's another side of that on how you go about implementing them and where and that process. So on the implementation side, some of the ways that some communities are doing it is basically all under some sort of a small area planning type strategy where you may have heard urban growth centers, urban villages, corridor planning, overlay districts, just like we've done here with our downtown urban design district. So depending on which program you want, depending on really on a lot of things, there's some data and research that you need to do depending on what your goal is and where you want to, what you want to do and where is what program might be best suited for that, and then how you implement that is part of that.
Kelly, has anybody here ever done a neighborhood empowerment zone?
We don't have one here.
We don't have one here. And is that state, federal?
It's a state.
Local
These
state?
are all controlled by attorneys.
created locally.
Okay, locally, but it's under state law.
How does it
Yeah,
work?
don't get those confused, but there's also what's called an empowerment zone that was done a long time ago by the federal government, but that's all, it's over with, and there was, I think, only 33 cities in the country that got those, but that's not the same thing as a neighborhood empowerment zone.
We know it.
I'd like to see some details on that, just to see what that's about. See what the part of our people look at.
Well, it just basically allows you to set your, it's done by local decision, and it basically gives you the ability to look at some tax incentives or other incentives that involve waiving of certain fees related to development and those kinds of things. So,
Do you ever, we know at Tier Zone that we have 5 entities that have relinquished some tax base for a period of time. I mean, they'll eventually get it back. Do you expand into those areas for these things too, or do you just stick with the city portion of the taxes? Or is it in all the above? You can do either?
for the neighborhood empowerment zone?
For any of these that say tax incentive, can you go to the other taxing entities and ask them if they want to participate? I'm thinking, for instance, not just this infill, but redevelopment, because I think that some of the areas like San Jacinto, let's say that, for instance, if you're going to get redevelopment along a corridor for business or business development, can you do something to incentivize with homes updating those? And can you get participation, because it would certainly benefit overall more than just the city. It would benefit Potter County and others as you raise those values and give some incentive for people to say, and I'm questioning it because I don't know how it works, could you even do things like, here's an incentive if you're going to do siding or energy updates or do things that would improve that neighborhood that then would encourage along the business corridor more growth there too. I mean, how far can you go with this?
Well, I guess the short answer to that's a pretty good question, but most of these are for local incentives, city incentives. The tiers you can gather, participation, but even in the tiers, they can opt out if they want to.
Sure.
But most of these are for just, for these purposes, for city incentives.
Okay.
And, but depending on what type of incentives you're talking about, these have certain things you can do, but the city always has the ability to, add additional incentives like energy efficient type things.
Does it have to fall into the Attorney General's book?
Yes, it would, Mayor, and we'll be glad to provide you a program with all the jersey numbers and the ins and outs on each of these programs, so you can see better how they might fit different situations.
Some of the programs have to have neighborhood buy-in, right? You need to get the neighbors to agree that they want to do something like this.
Well, it's always a good idea, no matter what you do, to
signatures.
Well, like the PID does,
Like the PID does, yeah.
Right.
Well, and I will say that educational entities here are that used to get money from the state, no longer get money from the state that was promised. Tiers would be stretching them.
Well, they can't do tiers. They didn't participate in tiers to begin with because they
Well, I'm talking about Amarillo College as well. They are.
Well, I think that there are opportunities that when it boils down to is that without private business, everyone engaged in doing this, because if we want to do some of these things, there are a lot of incentives for, let's just say, banks who do Community Reinvestment Act to do housing and small businesses and low to moderate income communities, et cetera, which Amarillo has plenty of. So I think that, just for the city to do all these things would be nearly impossible on our own. We'd have to have partnerships with others to develop a neighborhood, to develop a corridor of small businesses, to get people to move up the ladder of the economic stream. And so I think these in itself, by themselves, just for us, except for the tiers, would be really difficult here in Amarillo to do.
And moreover, I would add to that, all of these are temporary. They all have a limited lifetime.
Yeah, exactly.
For the infill and the redevelopment to succeed, there has to be a customer base for the particular product or company there. Otherwise, you pop up the company for 5 years, 10 years, and the subsidies go away and the business closes, and your neighborhood now has an empty building in it. So we can have all the public incentives we want, but that private, as you say, that private has to be there, and the demographics have to be there to support those businesses that go.
It's sort of like the new market tax credits with the developer looking at building the hotel. He's looking at this, and he's probably going to be successful if anyone's issuing any new market tax credits, because downtown census tract is a low-income census tract. So they'll have a lot of weight because of that. So there are a lot of things that come into this that we can't control at City Hall. It's just going to be out in the marketplace.
Well, we need to have. I think we still need to study, as Brian said, the tools so they're out there and we know
Sure,
if they're
I agree.
available or not. And then we do some. We didn't do downtown for just downtown. The next step of that is, as this 20 years from now, is to have areas around downtown being revitalized, as you see in other areas. And so you think about the neighboring areas of the oldest parts of town. They need basic incentives. We can do some infill, but I think we're not going to get infill if we don't clean up some of those areas too. And it's going to take private.
And we don't get people to clean up the credit so they can qualify to get those houses.
But it changes though, because right now, I think we got to look at them all and kind of have a tool bag you can pull something out of.
Well, it's also important to have a strategy behind what. It's important to have a strategy to know what you're trying to do and where, and then from that tool bag know which ones apply better to whatever situation you're trying to do.
Sure.
Some of these, if you're talking about industrial development, some of these are much more suited for that. If you're talking about residential redevelopment or infill, then certain things can be done. But I think it's important to have a pretty well-defined strategy on what you're wanting to do, and then have the tools available to do it. Because of some of these, it would require city participation, and not only tax incentives, but infrastructure redevelopment and those kinds of things. So if you're wanting to go down that road, you kind of need to be aware of where you're headed.
And part of that is limiting the footprint, so infill will be more attractive. Yeah.
But if you could reinvest in an area like you do with the tiers, if you take the area from Amarillo Boulevard on Hughes Street clear to Eastern, and you took all the businesses in the last 10 years, national franchises that have improved their patient and built new buildings, and you could have taken that money and incentivized that area and improved the streets and the street lights. Nothing like the scope of what downtown is, but do some basic cleanup, new curbs and gutters, new lights. We would be in a lot better position. My point is that I just think we have to consider some of this as a planning tool, and we can identify areas that are most in need, like Amarillo Boulevard, like around San Jacinto, like along 10th Street that gets off both sides from Arthur to Ross or even to Grand, and do some things that build business corridors, but then it flows out into the neighborhoods too. To me, that's going to allow for some infill and allow for redevelopment so that we don't just let it languish.
Well, a lot of the theory behind, say urban growth centers or urban villages is that you try to revamp the commercial areas of those, upgraded infrastructure and those kinds of things, and then that in turn helps to spill over into the residential areas that are.
And we're doing that. For instance, Dollar General, where they took at that King's Court Hotel that was a total nightmare. They took that out and put it in the Dollar General, and we see that. My point is, though, if you could take all the things on Amarillo Boulevard and you could have had any increase in tax from that zone and put it back into that area and helps to revitalize that area, I think we're learning that downtown.
And we could pass some zoning regulations, ordinances, so that we wouldn't have payday lenders on every block.
I remember that.
Yeah, I haven't forgotten it. I'm just not right to strike.
Well, isn't it safe to say
I hope
all
that's
of
coming
these-
up at the end of January 2013 when the ledge goes back there.
all of these they're qualified, and by that I mean like not in a blighted area is too strong the language, but you can't.
Similar and similar.
Yeah.
Statute
Really?
uses that terminology in some cases.
Blighted. Yeah. Well, I mean, but you can't go out and have tax incentives in Westgate Mall, or could you?
You could
No,
probably,
the
city could do a 380 agreement, because the 380 is broader than blighted. It says if you stimulate commerce. So, yes, you could if you want to use
But
general
that's not
fund
what
money.
we're looking to do.
No,
It'd
no,
be
I don't think
very
that-
hard to create
we're trying to-
reinvestments in the economy.
Let's do infrastructure.
We're trying to make things better.
Let me ask a question, maybe work on definition, and we'll start setting up fact sheets, summaries of what each of these are, and maybe what category of development or redevelopment they're the most appropriately used for. I think that what I've heard in a lot of cases is we're interested in taking some of the aging neighborhoods that have got open space in them and looking at residential. Is that,
Residential
Yes,
and
but-
some
and commercial?
basic services like
Well,
grocery stores.
and commercial, but it also means that if you drive the streets, or we cleaned up Maverick Club the other day, and we cleaned up 40 blocks around there with United Way. If you walk those neighborhoods, it's going to take, for anybody to come in there, it's going to take some people making a decision that they want to put a little more into their property. So let's go to San Jacinto, right off of 6th Street. You could begin something off of 6th Street, which also, if you upgrade that, it helps the schools, and you get more people moving in, it supports the schools. I just think there's a lot of little pieces of the toolbox that you can put things in to have. You can't separate them. That commercial is not going to come in if there's a deteriorated neighborhood and vice versa. You've got to sort of add a little bit to each of them as you go along.
I think
And it's private people coming in and doing it, but have some incentives for private people. Say, well, I've got 20 rental houses. I could get a little incentive to upgrade those and not have it so sloppy, and do some good in my neighborhood too.
if you fill the homes, the commercial and retail will follow it. I think we saw that recently with the Dollar General up here on the north side.
Well, it's a big topic, and there's certainly a lot of information and a lot of work to be done. But I know just from a banking perspective that just recently the Office of Control of the Currency, the OCC, who regulates state national banks, will give credit to banks who lend money to people in the food business who deal with low-income families, or just say maybe they support a garden or whatever it might be, but that has to do with food. So if you have a food processor that maybe hires low and moderate income folks, the banks get credit for financing that business. So those are the kinds of things that, on the big national scale that they're looking at. And they redevelop neighborhoods by doing something like that. But they're just a gamut of stuff. So.
But we can address the gamut and start to do both of these things. We just let it go, we're missing an opportunity. I.e. Amarillo Boulevard and all the places that have been improved along there.
And that have not.
Well, and the ones aren't because, you parlay that. You'd incentivize it. You'd say, hey, look at what the guy next door did. Why don't you do it?
There's different tiers you could even apply to. You do this and you get this. You do more than that, you get this. If you do this, you get this.
On Grand Street, just everywhere.
Grand Street from 3rd to I-40 would be pretty tough.
You can start to clean that up and just get the signs updated. It would be enormous.
Get rid of that old rendering plant.
Don't say anything about signs.
Not on today's agenda.
If you upgrade it, every one of those businesses on Amarillo Boulevard that upgraded their signs and did it the right way. So if you do, you go down Grand and it's an eyesore. Everything hanging out there, it's 50 years old and half broken and half hanging over. So anyway.
There's a lot of homework.
Yeah, there is a lot of homework. But we want to do it.
we'll
I
start
still
on
have
that.
the newspaper article on my wall that says no shaw law, so.
It says no what?
No shawl.
No shaw law.
From the sign.
You know, the sign ordinance is necessary. I think there's things that could be adapted in there, but if somebody just wants to throw rocks at it, they're silly.
Not on the agenda here.
Okay, any questions on today's agenda? Any questions on annexation policy? We'll continue to work on detail on your redevelopment stuff.
I've never
But,
seen Kelly so happy as he's been these last few months.
Oh, this is, the dream of a planner's life, or the life of a planner's dream, every look at it. We'll have the, I believe by resolution, the amended policy next week, Kelly? Is that right? So, thank you all very much. Okay, Mayor, if we could, we're at the point we'd like to call a closed session and get to work on a few other items we've got today.
Mayor and Commissioner, I'll call it